There is something happening, and there's the hope and the forward looking. So that is something that's being used effectively right now.
Awesome. Why don't we go to you, Corey?
Yeah, so building on that, what we've seen with No Kings, with the previous protests, with what we're going to see probably later in the year, has been really, really something. And it's something that just about everybody can do, right? Just about every community had some form of No Kings activity a couple weeks ago.
And I also, if I might insert, I've heard that we're supposed to have something in mid-July that will focus on the late John Lewis,
Yes, that's
my
correct.
colleague, like who I love to call Brother John, who I would assume will inspire like a good trouble
That's correct.
thematic.
There's going to be a series of Good Trouble events in July. That's exactly correct. What I would highlight is, and this is I think, an example that some of us can follow, and something that I'm certainly inspired by. There are folks who, and let's just talk about like the science community, folks who've been affected by cuts to NIH or NSF grants, right? My wife's a researcher. She relies on National Institutes of Health funding for her job. You've not seen that community wait for their institutions or for their bosses to
Hmm.
stand up for them. You've seen them stand up for themselves, right? And you've seen it in a few ways. You've seen it at Protect Democracy. One of the things we do is litigate. And we litigate on behalf of a handful of scientists who've been affected by NIH cuts that were done purely on the basis of DEI, so-called DEI. We're winning that case currently, right? There's a hold on the removal of those funds from those researchers. Then you've also seen groups like, there's a group called Stand Up for Science that's very active on social media. That was created by a handful of PhDs. These aren't political folks. These are folks who've been affected by the authoritarianism that we're all experiencing, and they've chosen to stand up for themselves, right? Literally stand up for science, right? And they are recruiting their peers, and they are standing up their peers. And again, they're not waiting for their hospitals or for their universities to do it for them. So I think that's something, it's inspiration for all of us, and it's something I take great heart in.
Right. It's amazing what an attack there has been on science. With all the vaccine talk, we had Secretary Kennedy in yesterday before the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health, and it's just amazing how, the science is being kicked aside.
100%. And, so you see individuals who can take action, you see small groups of people who can take action. And in the case that you just mentioned, Congressman, you see like the American Academy of Pediatrics, a really big influential group
Yeah.
that have stood up and have basically protested the removal of the vaccine panel by saying we're not going to participate.
Right.
That's them using their voice in a really powerful way.
Great. Lauren, your thoughts on change-making strategies that work best, and where do you turn for knowledge, inspiration, or reassurance?
I think I'm just your answers, both of you, are just like I want to kind of reiterate everything that you've both just said, because I think that it's really important. And I want to kind of give an example of locally in Albany, some of the work that's being done that I've been finding really, really inspiring, and the thing that I find motivating. I'm so deeply embedded in immigration that I am aware of kind of the other things that are happening, but I really spend all day so immersed in the immigration world that that's really my focus. Locally, there are grassroots organizations, so organizations like Columbia County Sanctuary Movement, RISE, a bunch of immigrant-led organizations that have really taken on educating communities, educating immigrants on what their rights are and how to protect them. There are limits to that, and I think one of the things that is really troubling in immigration is that it's already quite lawless. The administration has already wide authority to do lots of stuff, and due process protections are minimal. And yet, despite that, the administration isn't recognizing even those minimal protections and is acting completely contrary to the very little existing law. And yet, communities are really pulling together. They are protecting
Right.
themselves. They're protecting their neighbors. They know their rights. They know when somebody comes to the door and ICE is there. They know to ask for a warrant. They know that they do not have to open the door. And they know that if something does happen that is against the law, somebody is often there recording it. And so one of the things that's been really amazing to see is how the networks that we've built up over the years locally have pulled together to organize that, to verify ICE sightings, to verify immigration raids, so that people have accurate information. There isn't rumor that's unnecessarily terrorizing communities, because I think part of the immigration conversation is about creating terror. It is about frightening people, and it is about the power that is built around that. And having accurate information, being able to protect yourself, being able to know what to do, having prepared the kind of estate planning almost of what would happen if somebody were to be arrested by ICE, that has all been done by the community itself. And so it's so community led, and so indicative of the ways that people can lead the work themselves from a very grassroots level, that I think it's been pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah, it says a lot about those communities and about the spirit that's out there where people are defending individuals. And we've done what we can to inform people about their rights. I've also heard accounts in the news that indicate that some agencies are assisting in the deportation exercise from like another layer of bureaucracy, which to me is kind of mind-boggling that we've gone all out to meet quotas rather than, look for a criminal element. I think I heard that 6% of those that have been detained by the forces actually have criminal records. So I think
So
a quota effort really causes great disruption.
it also targets it doesn't incentivize correct like an accuracy of like actually going after I use that in quotes, people who are in violation of the law. It incentivizes people to meet quotas and grab people off of the street regardless of their citizenship or immigration status, if that's all they have to do.
Yeah.
I can go on, but I think that the broad disregard for people, like, I mean, the administration is currently going after children who have been granted special immigrant juvenile status. So people who are under the age of 21, who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by their parent and are in the United States without status. The administration is revoking their deferred action. It takes some time between the grant of the visa and being able to actually get a green card. And in that time, people don't have necessarily the protection. They can be removed from the country. And so now the administration has decided that these children are to be the targets. And so I think that that's, it shows the mismatch between what is said in the media and what is actually happening.
Right. So let's talk about the people that are doing this work day in and day out. What advice would you share for both newcomers to activism and seasoned advocates? How can they get started, stay effective, and in a way avoid burnout over what is a long haul? I mean, if there's anything that's been shared here from this office and that I keep reminding myself is be ready for this, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we've got a long way to go and so many things like drinking out of the fire hose, trying to inform people, but you don't even know where to start. It's in some moments. So Lauren, do we want to start with you?
I am not a good person to answer this question because I have no way to moderate my work habits, and I set the worst example for my students. But I haven't burnt out yet. And I think one of the reasons that I haven't burnt out is because all of my efforts are going towards standing in solidarity and not coming from a place of charity. I do not want to act as an outsider who is kind of granting representation or some sort of charitable outreach to people who are less fortunate. I am personally affected by what is happening. I am personally affected by what is happening in immigration because I know that the rights of immigrants, I know that the rights of people, regardless of their immigration status, has an effect on my rights as a US citizen. It is all built together. And I think that really trying to understand that this is a connected, integrated system has been very helpful. I think the other thing that I've really worked on is accepting that what my role is, and I think that this comes out of a solidarity approach, is I am not here to save anyone. That is not my goal. I am not a savior. I am here to do my job. I am here to show up. I am here to do the things that I can do, but I am not somebody who can individually save somebody. I am not a martyr. And I think understanding what my limits are and what my acceptance is for what I can do and what I cannot do. I think particularly when my concerns at the beginning of the administration were, oh my gosh, how am I going to get to my clients if they're in Guantanamo Bay? To now, how the hell am I going to get to my clients if they're in Libya? Has demonstrated kind of the limits of what I, as an individual, can do. But you do have the community, so you have more.
Right. Well, we certainly appreciate your work. Ruth, what about your sentiments here about newcomers or seasoned advocates? How to keep them going, keep them from burnout, and how can they be most effective?
I think it's really important to know yourself, what your tolerance is for news, everything from new. Some people can consume news and or work with or be close to upsetting situations, and everybody's affected differently. So some people need to distance themselves somewhat from or dose out in their news consumption if they see it's affecting them, and also affecting them so that they're not active in the world the way they'd like to be. I also think I talk about resilience a lot, and this is something from studying dissidents. My book has a resistance chapter, and I read memoirs and all, or just working in the archives, how people who are in these long-term regimes or just fighting, for situations of freedom, how do they cope? What do they do? And I think unity, solidarity, seeing yourself as part of something that's a collective action, as I said, it is important. Also choosing your battles. It's like the fire hose of falsehood and the fire hose of everything. And this has been the speed. I just want to say to people that the speed and intensity of what has been gone on since January 20th, the number of destructive things that have been done, does not resemble early Putin, early Orban, early Erdogan. It resembles more after there's been a coup. We didn't have a coup. He came in through election, and that's by design, the blitzkrieg. So it can be very hard to figure out, well, what the heck am I supposed to focus on? So they're choosing your battles, and having your areas where you are in community with others and you decide to focus on this can be very helpful. I guess the last thing I'd say is being together. The first question some of us talked about trying to also just have a private life, be a person. And I try to do that too. I know when I need to, I've had a huge desire to be in person with friends more. Also to see art, just certain things that as things become ugly, a desire to be immersed in beauty and friendship. And so you listen to those things. Or some people immersed in prayer, and you listen to those things. So that's what I would say. Kind of getting more in touch, in a way, going inward, but to be stronger as you serve in an outward way.
Wow. I was thinking of Harriet Tubman when you were talking, because everybody cites the bravery, the courage that it took to do that first journey along the Underground Railroad. But then to know that she did it up 10 times over,
Yeah.
just, you're probably drawn on these historic individuals who have really, done so much to fight for freedom and for people's rights. So, Corey, what thoughts do you have on this?
I mean, it's very hard to follow Ruth and Lauren on that. Maybe I'll talk about a different part of the question. You talked about kind of staying,
Yep.
how people can stay energized or I think two things. One, challenge yourself, right? As you are volunteering, as you're engaging, see if you can do more than you expect you can do, right? While protecting yourself, while taking care of yourself, all those things. Like, don't underestimate your agency and your ability to get involved and do stuff, particularly on the local level, right? Particularly on the local level. The other thing I would say is we have a saying at Protect Democracy, we try to avoid chasing the soccer ball. Like, I have a 8-year-old, and if you watch 8-year-old soccer game, it's just 15 kids or 16 kids chasing a ball, right? We're trying to, we try to determine, like, where might the ball be next week?
Like the Wayne Gretzky advice, right?
Exactly. Skate to where the puck is. Exactly. Yeah. And so where's the puck going to be? Where's the ball going to be? And, like, how can we help be ready for that moment? Right. While everyone else is reacting to the thing that happened today or the thing that happened yesterday. Because that's what the other side's doing. The other side's moving on to the next thing. Right. And so,
well, the modes of distraction are really disturbing, it's if it's not well planned, it comes across that way. But I didn't want to cut you off there with
no, not at all. I mean,
what I find challenging or necessary, maybe more than challenging, is that, I've got a number of colleagues who are informing their constituents in town halls. And then miles away, you have people who haven't heard a thing about the big, beautiful, which I think is more appropriately called the big, ugly. But, people are without the information. And I see us all as agents of information and sharing it with family, friends, neighbors. They may be states away or congressional districts away, but if they're not getting, I see the polling, it's encouraging. 2.5 to 1 are against the big, beautiful, but that amount of people that are undecided, mostly driven by unawareness, is a threatening thing.
Can I just interject?
Yeah, sure.
A moment of venting that that I often talk about it's the upside down world of authoritarianism, where, like, war is peace, up to work will set you free. That was the slogan on the Auschwitz. And so to call this bill the big beautiful bill is just, it's sadistic. And a lot of what I've tracked over the last years is this kind of, the problem that that certainly the person now in the Oval Office doesn't wish anything good for the American people, doesn't care about public welfare, because autocrats are only interested in their own selves. But they also engage in this sadistic, it's designed to depress you. And to call this a big beautiful bill, it's the ugliness, it's a human ugliness behind it. It's really, I really object to this as a historian of also language and authoritarian cultures. It's how you bring that about is to name things like that are actually creating massive hardship and harm. It's just terrible. So sorry, that was not one of your questions, but I had to.
No, and now further add to that, it just is, sometimes there's a thought that I have that, throwing beautiful out there as a label way in the beginning of the process. Well, how can anybody hate anything or dislike anything or oppose anything that's beautiful? We'd be foolish to reject it, but it's mislabeled. So we have our work cut out for us. We know one of the biggest obstacles, obviously, in our country today, and perhaps over the last couple of years, is polarization. And what are effective ways that we as individuals can try to combat polarization? And is it worth it to spend our time trying to change people's minds? Why don't we start with you, Corey?
Yeah, I think it's my turn. But I'm really interested to hear what Lauren has to say. Um, I, so, we Protect Democracy, we are a cross-partisan organization. I spent my career before coming here working for Democrats exclusively. And I have a certain point of view on the world. But I feel very fortunate in this moment that I work with folks who come with different backgrounds and different points of view. And the one thing that we agree on is preventing our democracy from declining into a more authoritarian form of government. That's our mission statement. And everything else we are maybe not in agreement on, but that set of issues we can like row in the same boat on. And I mean this very, very sincerely. I feel very fortunate and blessed that I get paid to do that, right? That I feel nourished by that. Um, Not everyone is lucky to do that. But I think everyone has the opportunity in their community to find things to work on with folks with whom you might not agree with, right? And um, we there's a concept that we talk about of there's your circle of concern, which is like what's going on in the world, right? Which is very worth concern. And we cannot turn away, and we must remain outraged, as we've talked about. Then there's like your circle of influence. There's the things that you can have impact on, right? And then there's the circle of control, the things that you can directly impact. What are those things within your circle of influence, circle of control, where you can join forces with people with whom you might not agree on everything? And how can you like get wins together? I know it sounds more easily said than done, but I think that it is doable, particularly on the local level. And particularly as the impacts of this authoritarian government are felt by the broader population. I'll say one more thing and then I will shut up. We have a colleague who talks about the blast radius. Like if you think about like a nuclear weapon or a huge bomb, there is a blast radius that ripples out. And I think that's what's happening here in our society is the impacts of Doge and of this president and of their theories of change is affecting people and bringing people into this fight that never thought that they would need to be in this fight. How can we find common cause with those folks and work together on whether it's science funding or whether it's making sure our roads and bridges get fixed or making sure that FEMA is not politicized? How can we join forces or making sure that people aren't sent to Libya, right? To Lauren's point, how can we find those common causes and work together and put the other things to the side?
So is it fair to say that what I'm hearing from you is that the hurt involved with this bill is maybe the thread that can bridge the gap?
I think it's a thing that hurts, the many, many segments of society that may not find common cause will probably find common pain by what
Interesting
being done. Yeah.
Yeah. Lauren.
I feel like I could go on an hour to 2 hour long rant on this. Because one, I think that we are not as polarized as people think we are. I think that Mamdani's win in the primary in New York City yesterday indicated that an area that had increased votes for Trump in November ended up voting for somebody who identifies and was elected as a democratic socialist on popular policies that, quite frankly, if we went back to the 70s, would have been appropriate and probably were platformed by the Republican National Convention. If you go back to the 1970 Republican National Convention platform, if you look at like Nixon's priorities, there are things like healthcare for all, a 4-day work week, anti-military spending, and I think that people would be surprised, by what those fairly recent positions were and how far we've changed since then. I also think, Corey, kind of going to your point about finding common cause, immigration and immigration-related legal battles have shown, I think, really dramatically how broadly protections around the law, because the rule of law is under attack. It is, I think, Ruth, to your point about kind of the up is down terminology and the portrayal of ideas as the thing that they are not. The administration has been completely lawless and attacked the rule of law left and right in ways that are truly terrifying. And I say this as somebody who does not have, I do not, I don't have great reverence for the law in its kind of form overall, because I think there's lots of injustices that I can see in how it's currently structured. But I think that, you know, people who are Reagan appointees on the Fourth Circuit have been, you know, the people to write opinions to say that the immigration renditions, the expulsions, I'm not going to call them deportations, because deportation indicates that there has been a legal process. There has not been a legal process for many of these. But these kind of summary expulsions are unconstitutional, right? That is a Reagan appointee. It's a conservative judge. Danielle Sassoon, who was the Southern District, the attorney for the Southern District, you know, she was in the Federalist Society, and she was the person who resigned over dropping the Eric Adams public corruption charges. And then there were like 7 more DOJ attorneys, many of whom were Federalist Society, like long-term, very conservative prosecutors who resigned over by refusing to drop those charges. And I think that that is a place that kind of the structures of our society, that is a place where it is really important. And I think it's really possible to see how people are coming together to protect those. Of course, the flip side of that is that they are being called Marxist judges, even if they are Trump appointees.
Amazing. Yeah, we do like tossing labels onto people. Thank you. And Ruth.
Yeah, start with that calling them Marxist is like the oldest authoritarian playbook thing on the right. Berlusconi used, because he was so corrupt, he had 13, excuse me, 13 corruption trials, collaborated with the mafia, the whole, you know, put fascists in power. He was always talking about witch hunts and communist judges. It's just like the same rhetoric over and over again. I think it is worth it to try and change people's minds because human lives are at stake. Because what autocrats do is because polarization is when we are very divided, we can't agree on things, but often it's when you're still in some kind of the same system. What they've been trying to do, and this is why the immigrants were eating cats and dogs and the dehumanizing stuff, they're trying to get us into something I call survivalism. Which is what right and left wing authoritarians do. It's to get people to feel that the targeted group poses an existential threat to their safety, their family, and they're everywhere. So immigrants are perfect, or it's an internal enemy. This is what we saw with the rhetoric around the Los Angeles, you know, the ICE, that whole thing going on. That both Stephen Miller and Hegseth said the internal enemy, immigrants who are all criminals, are collaborating with an external enemy, which is terrorist groups, transnational crime networks. And so it's everywhere. And so you get people into this state of dread. And that is how you get them to tolerate or commit or participate in violent acts against the targeted group. So that's survivalism. And it's been used since the fascists. I hear the same words, the same playbook. So coming together and trying to disrupt that and pointing out the fallacies of that can be a life-saving thing. It's very difficult to do, and Trump has worked for 10 years to get people. This was the basis of my report to the January 6th committee, how he has actually been emotionally conditioning people for 10 years now to see violence as a positive option. That if you can't decide that violence is a way that you solve disagreements and you deal with political transitions. You don't want to leave office, you have an insurrection. So that's so there are huge stakes in in the work of success of the work of trying to change minds.
Yeah.
Congressman, may I?
Yeah,
I apologize, but
please, Corey.
Ruth just touched on something
Please.
I think is really, really interesting. Talked about the kind of the 10-year conditioning that's
Yeah.
right. We did some research recently with a group out of Tufts University into Generation Z, so like 18 to 29-year-old views on democracy. And one of the sets of questions that we asked was about political violence and kind of the framing being, is there sometimes reason for political violence, right? And so if you think about this cohort, if you think about a 29-year-old, they've not really lived a political life where Donald Trump was not an avatar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you ask the question of is political violence sometimes acceptable, you get really startling numbers
Right.
from some of these folks across the political spectrum, whether they're conservatives or progressives. They now view political violence as a legitimate means to an end in levels that would be alarming, right? We're not talking majorities, but in levels that are deeply alarming and that can only kind of point to a conditioning effect that's taken place.
Now, this is the problem with seeing Trump as a clown, a buffoon. I've been trying since 2016, literally like 9 years, hundreds of pieces, interviews to try and get people to take this seriously, because he's truly one of the most skilled propagandists in history. And people roll their eyes when I say that, but think about what he was able to do, because he didn't have a one-party state with a closed media like Mussolini or whoever. He convinced tens of millions of people that he won the 2020 election, working in a democracy with a totally pluralistic media environment. And he'd been conditioning them. They're vectors of this. So so I'm not surprised. It's Corey. It's really dismaying but unsurprising to hear that his and others, all of his enablers, doesn't do it alone. Fox News, it's paid off. It's paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. With so many urgent issues competing for our attention, how do you decide where to focus your energy? I mean, it's that fire hose again, drinking out of that fire hose. And, there's so many hurtful things, but I don't know, we look at what maybe is most impacting or impacting most people. But how do you choose? Do we want to start with you, Ruth?
Yeah, I think all of us have our fields of expertise or endeavor or interest. And I think we can ask ourselves, how do we feel we can serve the best? How can we make an impact based on our own talents? Because everyone has a way, everyone has skills and talents, and these can be placed at the service of our communities, of our democracy, and that can lead you. And then again, as I said before, choosing your battles. You can't do everything. And the blitzkrieg, so it's the blitzkrieg and speed, and also so many things getting destroyed at once. But you can find your place where you feel you can serve most effectively.
Okay. And Lauren?
I think that was pretty much a perfect answer, so I don't know if I can improve on that. I think one thing that I'll add is that the talents that you might have aren't necessarily the things that you do in a professional life. And you might have all sorts of things that you might be able to do that you might be absolutely extraordinary at that could be very effective. And maybe that is organizing files, or there's like such a wide variety. I could just list off a million things, but it doesn't have to be like, oh, you're an accountant, go do accounting.
Excellent. Corey, you look like you're ready to jump in here.
Oh goodness. Well, maybe I'm just jittery. I think +1 to both of those responses. I think don't underestimate what you can do close to home, right? And I think that's to Lauren's point of like, people can stuff file folders, people can make phone calls, knock on doors. There's things that feel small but add up. I think one thing that I think sometimes people confuse reading the news with doing the work, which is not the same, right? Like wallowing in the mire is not the same as actually like picking up a shovel. And so, for me, that manifests itself as I turn off my notifications. I no longer get like the New York Times notification of every horrific thing that happens throughout the day. I will find that news on my own time, right? And I also don't count that as like that's not me putting an effort, right? That's me being aware of what's going on in the world. I can then take another steps to have impact in the world, whether that's in my job or whether that's volunteering, joining marches, whatever.
Yeah. I think Lauren touched on this earlier that, there have been some programs that had been championed by or uh, encouraged by one party more than the other, and both sides have success stories. And with that polarization that we have, is there any room for like saying, well, to the Republican who is perhaps in need of coming, is perhaps aligned with what's going on now, that not seeing it all for what it is? Is there a way to cite for a Republican, the Republican history of, that progress, healthcare for all, and that Lauren had mentioned, or is there a way to get a Democrat who's fallen into that zone of supporting this Trump effort? Is there a way to remind them of things that have been brought about through the years with FDR to Clinton to Biden? Is there a way to have them see that these were good things that either party promoted, and now this doesn't fall in that category? Is there a way to strategize around that?
I have thoughts, but Corey probably has data and research, so I will defer to.
I have neither. And I'll go first because Lauren's view is probably more valuable. Like I think I have trouble answering that question actually, so I'm gonna defer. Go ahead, Lauren.
So I think so one piece of research that I read recently, and I was trying to find it before this call, and I couldn't pull it up because of the dog bowl shattering issue. But there's good research that indicates that people pick a representative and then align their views with that representative. It's not necessarily like, oh, I like this person's hair and I'm going to therefore align all of my views with them, but it's more subtle than that. But it tends to that's how people tend to go from kind of maybe being conservative on finance to kind of all of a sudden being a hardline anti-immigrant tyrant. And so I think that is actually helpful and hopeful in that it indicates that people are not necessarily their views aren't necessarily as embedded as we might think. I think talking to people, literally talking to people of all sorts of backgrounds is really, really valuable. I love people. Yeah. I love my job. I get to talk to clients. I get to talk to you all. I get to talk to students. I love people. And I will literally talk until somebody interrupts me. But I think that people are reasonable. People are often not bad people. And I think that talking to people and having people actually understand what the issues are. So maybe it looks like people who are in upstate New York don't get as much support in Medicaid funding or social services funding as immigrants, right? Explaining to people how those are actually different pots of money, what different issues are. People who are recently arrived in the United States aren't eligible for Medicaid. Actually explaining things tends to go much further than having an argument. And I think that people are actually curious and reasonable. And I've had a lot of success in kind of having some of those smaller, simpler conversations. I will stop talking.
Awesome. Ruth.
I'd just say the same thing. I did an election tour last fall went all kinds of places, spoke in red areas. And one of my maxims is never underestimate the American people. And also that people always ask me, because I study like these, like the worst humans and the bleak mentalities, but I'm an optimist. And I agree with Lauren's assessment. I think most people are good, and if they understand things, they are able to change their ideas and shift their voting habits. But Congressman, I want to thank you for doing this, because I haven't. I think it's really very nice to have. You're busy and have had us come here to speak together, and that's your doing. So I wanted to appreciate you for doing this, because not every elected representative does this. So I think relatively few. So
Well, I
thank
know
you.
that we had a lot of curious and enthusiastic people that are going to Zoom in with us tonight. And, all of you as panelists have shared some
Like
valuable
Rose.
thoughts that I think will encourage people to move forward. Do you have, any of you have any other final words of wisdom that you want to share with the Zoom audience?
I have one quick one, and I'd lost the thread on it a minute ago, but going back to the Gen Z cohort, and you talk, Congressman, about things that we've gotten done in the past, right? And getting people to believe that those things are doable in the future. Think again about this youngest group that's gonna be in control of this country, hope, sooner than later, right? They have aspirations for what American democracy could be, and we see that in our research of them. They believe in like the ideals. There's a big delta between that and what they experience, right? And like I think we have to acknowledge that there is a cohort of voters who have not experienced democracy working for them in the ways that some of us have. And part of that's explaining to them, part of that's talking, part of that's listening too. And hearing their experiences. These are the folks who grew up in COVID. These are the folks who've grown up, as we talked about, under this presidency, under the cloud of authoritarianism. Hearing how they're experiencing things, hearing what their aspirations are, hearing how they can be served, I think is a really important step, and something, again, that we can all aspire to do.
Wonderful. Lauren or Ruth, anything else?
I just want to add to Corey's point, which I keep saying, like I'm adding to Ruth's point or Corey's point. You just have so many great points. This is also a generation that has grown up post 9/11. They've only known the Patriot Act world. That is kind of the world that is the normal to them. And so I think that it is different. I think that the theme of agency and taking care of yourself has come up several times. And I want to reiterate that I think people underestimate how much power they have as an individual. And they really, you can do a lot more than you think you can. You really can. If you put your mind to something, like you would be amazed at what you can do. And I think that I would just encourage people to don't limit yourself. Also, don't be afraid of pissing people off. It's fine.
I think that's great. And that's been a theme, whether it's challenging yourself, don't underestimate yourself, and just believing in what you can accomplish by yourself and especially together with others.
Awesome. Well, I certainly thank you all. The three of you have been great panelists, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. And for all those that are here with us on Zoom and live streaming on social media, thank you for your presence and your attention. And please feed us any info that you would like to. I know I'm leaving with new ideas for how to fight here in DC. And I hope those attending are feeling energized and empowered as well. Michaela, why don't I toss it back to you?
Awesome. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, for everyone attending, and I'll let you all go into the rest of the evening and empowered and energized by this wonderful discussion. And with that, we'll close it out.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you again. Thank you, everybody.